Hello everyone, this is Daisy. Welcome back to this crochet along. We intend to create a basic granny square top, and as you can see the thumbnail does not have a picture for the top, and that is because we haven't yet completed the top. So once we finish the top, the thumbnail will be edited to show you what we finished. All the preliminary details have been discussed in the previous video. Now before we start to crochet, there are a few more things I wish to discuss with you. Consider it an introduction to granny square. Here's a simple granny square which I have made. The granny square is made up of blocks and spaces. So these groups of 3 DCs are called granny blocks or granny clusters. And then we have these chain 1 spaces. The square shape is achieved by increasing only in each corner. Now along the sides, we will make one cluster in each chain 1 space, and along the corners, we will make 2 clusters into each corner. There are 2 ways to make the granny square. One is where the row beginnings and the row ends are along one of the sides. And method number 2 is where the row beginnings and ends are in the corners. For this project, I will be using the corner method. The main reason for this is because it is way easier to hide the tails in the corner. If the row beginnings and ends were along the sides, I will have only 3 DCs to hide the tail. Now I know a lot of people will say go left, go right, and then go up, go down, but it gets a lot more complicated with the grannies because you have so many chain spaces, and also going up and down you will have a different color down, you will have another color on top, so that really makes things more difficult. So it's a lot more easier in the corner because in the corners I have 6 DCs where I can hide each tail. So because I'm hiding the tail into 6 DCs, the tail is a lot more secure and safe than it would be if I try to hide it inside just 3 DCs. And one last thing I wanted to address before we start the square is how to avoid a wonky granny square. Now if you've made a granny square before and it had more than 8 or 9 rows, you would have noticed that the sides tend to become crooked. That is not a mistake, it is the nature of the granny square. Due to the angle of the stitches, the corners tend to tilt towards the left. Now this will not be a problem if your project has many tiny squares of 3 or 4 rows each and you're going to join them later. But as the number of rows increase, it becomes a lot more evident. Not only are the sides not straight anymore, but the rows are not parallel to each other anymore. You can see that more clearly if I line up this ruler with row number 2. So let me identify the 2 granny clusters from row number 2. These are the 2 granny clusters of row number 2. And I'm just going to line up my ruler along with the edge of row 2, and you can already see how there is such a big tilt between this and this. So this is what happens. So each row is progressively tilting a little bit more. This is going to be a big problem for our project because both the front and the back panel will be one big square. Each stripe will twist a little bit in the center and it will give this spiraling effect. It'll go like that. Now the easiest way to avoid this problem is by turning after each row. So that is what we will be doing for this project. That's really all I wanted to talk about before we started. So thank you all for being so patient and hearing me ramble. So let's begin. And disclaimer, since the target audience are absolute beginners, this is going to be a painfully slow tutorial. And having said that, I am presuming you already know the basic slip knot. If you do not, I will leave a link in the description box to my other video. So I'm presuming you already know the slip knot, the chain and the DC. Alright, so let's go to the actual granny square. So before we start making the first row, we want to make a center into which we will be working the first row. So to do that, we're going to chain 4, 1, 2, 3 and 4. So I'm going to form a ring by inserting my hook into the very first chain and making a slip stitch. So when I make this slip stitch, I'm going to grab this chain with my thumb and my index finger so that I will not lose the center after the slip stitch. So here's the center of my ring, and now we are ready to work row 1. So let's make the very first granny cluster into the ring, and when I'm inserting my hook into the ring, I'm going to make sure that this tail we have from the ring lays on top of the hook. So I'm going to put it right here on top of the hook next to that ring. So what this will do is when I pull up a loop to make the first DC, it will trap that tail inside this stitch. So we've completed our very first DC and we have the tail trapped inside. So let's complete this cluster by making 2 more DCs. 2 and 3. And now we're going to chain 2 for our very first corner and then make another DC cluster. 1, 2 and 3. And I'm going to chain 2 for the next corner and make another DC cluster. So this is the third DC cluster I'm making. 1, 2 and 3. And I'm going to chain 2 for the next corner. Now in order to do the last DC cluster, instead of making 3 DCs, I am only going to make 2 DCs. 1 and 2. So all this while I was still holding my tail over my hook. So at the end of this round, it's neat inside my ring. So here we are at the end of row 1. So we have 1, 2, 3. We have 3 complete DC clusters, and here we have a partial DC cluster. So what I'm going to do to finish this DC cluster is insert my hook into this chain 4 space that we made at the beginning of this round, and I'm going to slip stitch. So when I slip stitch, what it does is it pulls up this loop together, and the 4 chains we made at the beginning of this row, it will form both the last DC of this cluster, and it will also form the corner in this place. So that way we have 4 corners and 4 DC clusters in our very first row. Now before we proceed to the next row, I'm just going to pull this tail a little bit and then cut it off. Be careful, make sure you're not cutting off the other DCs. There goes my tail. And like I mentioned earlier, we're going to turn after every row in order to counter the spiraling granny effect. So I'm going to chain 4 and then turn my work. So I'm going to turn, and after turning, I'm just going to make one DC cluster into the very first corner that you find here. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. So here's the first DC cluster in this corner. And now that we are on the side, between every cluster we're going to make a chain 1. So I will chain 1, and now we have this corner. So into every corner we're going to make a DC cluster, a chain 2, and another DC cluster, all in the same space. So let's make the first DC cluster. 1, 2, and 3. So that's the first cluster for this corner. And then chain 2 and make a second cluster into the same corner. 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to repeat the same thing around the rest of this row. So I'm going to chain 1 along the side, and into the corner I'm going to make one DC cluster. 1, 2, 3, chain 2, and make a second DC cluster into the same corner. 1, 2, and 3. So we add the next side again, so chain 1 for the side and make another DC cluster into this corner. 1, 2, 3, chain 2 for the corner and make a second cluster into the same corner. 1, 2, and 3. So we're at the last side, and let's chain 1 for the side. And now we want to complete this corner by making 2 DCs into this chain space. 1. So in case you were wondering, so this was the chain space where we slip stitched into at the end of the previous row. So just make 2 DCs into that chain space. 1 and 2. And just like in the previous row, we are going to complete this DC cluster by slip stitching into the first chain 4 space we made at the beginning of this row. So now we are at the end of row 2. This is what our square looks like right now. So at the end of row 2, I'm going to fasten off with a long tail because I want all my granny stripes to be 2 rows. So I'm going to leave a tail of approximately 4 to 5 inches. So let's join the next color. So we want to remember that we're planning to turn after each round. So this is the right side of row 2 is facing me, so I want to turn my work before I join the next color. And also, while I'm joining a new color, I do not want to join the new color in the same space where I finished the previous color. I'm going to move over to this corner and pull up this loop. I'll tell you why in just a moment. So I'm just going to pull this tail through and just make a simple knot to secure it. This is nothing fancy, it's just a regular knot. So this color is now secure. The reason why I'm shifting to a different corner is because I already have one tail in this corner. So if I add the new color in the same corner, I will have to hide two tails into the same stitch or the same corner. But if I add the new color in a different corner, I'll have to hide one tail here and one tail here. So it is okay to join in the same place, but what will happen is if I try to hide two tails into the same corner, the stitch will become a bit more bulkier. So I don't like how it looks, so because I don't like it, I'm just switching over to a different corner. And honestly, I feel it definitely does feel much better. So let's begin row number 3. So chain 4, 1, 2, 3 and 4, and I'm going to make one granny cluster into the very first corner over here. 1, 2 and 3. So that is one cluster in the corner. Now chain 1 for the side, and here we have a space in the side, so we're going to make one cluster into each space in the side. So 1, 2 and 3. Chain 1 for the side, and into this corner we're going to make one DC cluster, chain 2 and DC cluster. 1, 2, 3, chain 2, let's get that tail out of the way. 1, 2 and 3. So here is the first corner. Now chain 1 and make a DC cluster into the next chain space. 1, 2, 3. Chain 1 again because we're still on the side. And now we're going to work into this corner, so make one DC cluster, 2, 3, chain 2 for the corner, DC cluster into the same stitch again, 1, 2 and 3. So here's another corner finished. Chain 1 because we're on the side, and make a DC cluster into this chain space. 1, 2, 3, chain 1. We're going to make another corner, so we'll make a cluster, chain 2 cluster. 1, 2, 3, chain 2, and 1, 2, and 3. So that is this corner completed. Chain 1, DC cluster into the space. 1, 2, 3, chain 1, and now let's finish this DC cluster by making 2 DCs into that chain space. 1 and 2. And to finish this row, we're going to slip stitch into that chain 4 space we made at the beginning of the row. And that is the end of row 3. So at the end of row 3, we already have 2 tails. Now the thing is, you do not want to leave all your tails towards the end of the project. So if you're going to sew in your tails, try to do that after every 5 or 6 rows. Or I will show you a method that I use where I work over the tails, which is a lot easier. So if you're going to sew in the tails, so here's this tail. I'm going to insert my needle through all of these stitches. Take this yarn tail, thread it, and just pull it through so that it's secure. And now you want to go into one of the other stitches. So this tail came out through this stitch. You do not want to go back into the same stitch. I'm going to go skip one loop and go over into the next stitch and pull it through the other side. And now I can trim this tail. So this is how I hide the tails if I'm going to use the sewing method. While the sewing method is quite efficient, considering how many color changes I'm going to have in my top, that's going to be a lot of sewing in the end. I know a lot of people who love the granny square, but they do not do many projects because they don't like to sew in the tails in the end. So I am kind of a lazy person, so I figured out a way to work over the tails, forming loops, keeping the tail back and forth in a way so that I can just pull the tail closed without having to sew them in the end. So this is what I mean. So while I did the color change between the green and the yellow, when I started the yellow, I just placed the green tail back and forth and worked over those stitches in a particular way so that now I can close it off by merely pulling at the end. So I'm going to pull this end and see that this part of the loop got shorter. So now I'm going to grab the opposite side and I'm going to pull it closed so that the opposite loop got locked in place. And now I'm going to close this other loop by pulling on the tail. So that's it. Now my tail is secure, and I can trim that tail. So this method is actually now my new favorite method to hide my tails, not just for the granny square but for other projects as well, because I hate sewing in the tails. So let me show you how I do that. So here I have a row 4, so I have 2 colors already, and I'm going to join my third color. And before joining your colors, let's do a check. So I have the wrong side of the previous row facing me, and I have the tail in this corner, so I'm going to attach the new color in this corner. I'm going to pull that tail through, leave about 4 inches, and then go ahead and knot it. So like I showed you earlier, I just loop the tail back and forth so that it forms sort of a bow shape, and then I hold it in place and work over the tails so that I can just pull them close in the end. So I'm going to take my tail from the center towards the left, and then I'm going to take it over to the right so that I've formed a loop on the left. And now I'm just going to do the opposite. So I'm going to bring this tail back here to the center, so that now I have 2 loops, one on the left, one on the right. Alright, so I'm just going to hold on to that, insert my hook, and I'm going to use my index finger to hold all those strands together. You want to make sure all those strands are on top of the hook. So in case that was confusing, let me just show you one more time. So this is how I'm holding it. So my yarn is over here. This is how I hold my yarn, and I have my hook and my granny square here together, and I'm so bringing this tail to my left, looping it around and bringing it to the right, and now I'm gonna bring it back to the left after forming a loop here. So I'm just going to use my index finger to hold on to all of this. This looks a little complicated because I'm trying to do it slowly. Trust me, when I'm working in normal speed, it just goes really fast. So don't panic, this is not difficult at all. Now we're going to start this row exactly in the same way we've been doing all of the other rows. So just chain 4. Now you're going to make the chain 4, and because we were holding all those strands on top of the hook, we just strapped all those strands into this chain that we made here. Alright, so at this point we want to make sure you're not tugging or pulling at any of these loops, and just like we did in the previous rows, we're going to make a cluster into the very first space over here. So make a 1 DC, so here's the first DC, and make a second DC. Now before making the third DC for this cluster, we're going to do something a little different. So I'm just going to bring this loop over this corner, this chain space in the corner, and I'm going, while I'm inserting my hook into the corner, I'm also inserting my hook into this loop. So that's the loop on the left, not the loop on the right. And I'm going to make the last DC for that cluster. Right? So we finished that cluster. Now we're not going to bother this end for now because we can't close this loop until we finish the rest of this row. Come back here, and after that we can tighten this loop. So I'll show you how to do that at the end of this row. I'm going to work this row at normal speed because I think by now you know the pattern. So on the sides it's chain 1, cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1, cluster till you go to the corner. So I'm not going to do that slowly, I'm just going to do it regular speed. So 1, 2, 3, chain 1, 1, 2, 3, chain 1, 1, 2, 3, chain 1. So that is the last cluster before we go into the corner. So in this corner we have the other tail. I'm going to do the same thing over here. So I'm going to form a little loop going from left to right. I'm sorry, I got my left under. So I'm going to take my tail to the left, and I'm going to bring it to the right and form a loop over here on the left side. And now I'm going to bring this tail back to the left, and while doing that I'm going to form a loop on the right. So I'm holding all that in place. So here is the corner. So I'm going to grab all these strands together and hold it in place along with this side. We're going to work the first cluster into this corner. What I will do is I'm going to bring this loop over this corner space. So I'm holding all these strands together. I'm just bringing the loop over the chain space so that when I insert my hook into the chain space, I am also inserting my hook into this loop. And I'm going to make my very first DC for this cluster. And now I'm going to bring that loop back up so that the next time I insert the hook into that chain space, I'm not going into this loop on the right, but I will be going around it. So both the strands of that loop are now on top of the hook. You see that? So first it was like this, and now I'm keeping it like this. And I'm going to make 2 more DC to complete the very first cluster of this corner. And then chain 2 for the corner. And now we're going to do the second cluster in this corner. So I'll make the first 2 DC in the same way. I'm just going to hold all the strands together along with all these DCs, so that when I insert my hook inside, all of those strands are on top of the hook. I want to make sure none of the strands are somewhere else. So make 1 more DC. That is the second DC of this cluster. Now before I make the third DC for this cluster, I want to identify this loop on the left, and I just want to bring that over the corner. So again, when I'm making the last DC for this cluster, not only am I going into the chain space, I'm also going into the loop. And I've finished that cluster as well. So I'm going to chain one and pull that loop out so I can take the hook outside. And now we can, since we finished this corner completely, we can actually tighten these loops and close that tail and cut the yarn. So I'm going to grab this loose end of the tail and gently tug at it. So you can see which end of the loop on the opposite side is getting tighter, or it's getting pulled through. It's wrong side. So yeah, this is the tail. So this side is getting tugged. So I'm going to grab the other end of the loop and I'm going to pull it. So you know you're pulling the right side if the loop opposite is getting shorter. So if you're pulling and instead of the loop, if the tail is getting shorter, you're pulling on the wrong side. So just grab the other side and keep pulling until you completely close that loop. Pull it tight, and now you can pull the tail and close this loop as well. And now what we've basically done is we have worked over the tails, but in such a way that the tail has passed through back and forth 3 times. So it is actually the same as sewing in the tails back and forth 3 times. So we've, technically speaking, we sewed in the tails, but we did not sew in the tail separately with a needle. We did it as we were going, which is why I love this method. So, and now I can cut that tail. So I've decided that this will be the back of the panel and this is going to be the front. So when you see it from the front, so basically I want the even rows to be the right side. So you see from the front you cannot even see the tail. It's completely secure. I have used this for multiple tops and I've even thrown them into the washing machine and they are very secure. So you do not have to worry about your tails coming loose. And I'm just going to complete the rest of this row so that I can show you how to finish this corner and this row. So we've already made a chain one, so I'm going to work the rest of this row in regular speed. So if you're crocheting along with me, you can just crochet along. So 1, 2, 3, chain 1, 1, 2, 3, chain 1, 1, 2, 3, chain 1. We're in the corner, so that will be cluster, chain 2, cluster. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. We've reached the sides again, so it's just a chain 1 and a cluster. So chain 1, 1, 2, 3, chain 1, 1, 2, 3, chain 1, 1, 2, 3, chain 1. So we reached a corner again. So cluster, chain 2, cluster. So 1, 2, 3, chain 2, 1, 2, 3, So here's our last row. Let's do this. So chain 1, 1, 2, 3, chain 1. So I know I said this video is going to be painfully slow, but I'm intentionally doing this row at regular speed so that you will know how simple this actually is. So once you understand how to do the granny square stitch, it goes really fast. In fact, beyond a point, it can get even monotonous and boring. So here we've reached the end of the row. I've already chained one after the previous cluster. So we need to make a 2 DC into this chain space in order to finish this cluster. So what I'm going to do is I am going to bring this loop over and I'm going to make 1 DC so that when I insert my hook into the corner, I'm also going into this loop and make 1 DC. And now we're going to make the last DC for this round. So I'm going to bring this loop back over so that when I insert my hook into the chain space, that both the strands are above my hook. So you see that it's not down here, but it's right here, so that I'm inserting my hook into the space with the strands above it and make that last DC for this row and finish this row by doing a slip stitch into the chain 4 space we made at the beginning of this row. And let me get my stitch marker and secure this. Okay, so tightening this is exactly the same as the other tail. So I'm gonna grab the tail end first and gently tug at it very slowly. So I see that this side of the loop got pulled. So I'm going to grab the other end and tug at it so that the loop on the opposite end is getting tightened. So that loop is tightened, and now I'm going to grab this tail and pull it through. So that's it. My tail is completely secure. I know this feels very complicated, might even feel like a waste of time, but trust me, once you get the hang of this, it saves you so much time. You will literally not be wasting any extra time in order to do this. It just comes naturally to me, as in, like, let's say this is the thing, the tail, and I have another color. So I just put it here and then put it here. I have my little bow on top of the hook, so I just grab it and keep working like I always do, and at the end of the row I'm just tightening it and I'm good to go. It might take a little bit of practice, just be very patient, you will get the whole, and trust me, it's really worth it. So the only thing you need to remember is placing the tails is quite easy. You just need to form a loop on the left, a loop on the right, and bring the tail back to the left. So the intention of placing the tail like that and working is to work around all the strands and trap them inside the stitches. The very first stitch of the first cluster and the very last stitch of the last cluster, you need to make sure that you're going into the loop and not just around all the strands. So going into the loop is what will cause the loop to lock around this stitch. So if you forget to go into the loop and you pull the tail, it will just slip out through the other side. It won't get trapped in this first DC. So that is why when we do the first DC, we go into the loop. So that's about it. That's the basic granny square. Along the sides you go cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1, cluster, chain 1. In the corners you go cluster, chain 2, cluster in the same place. When you're beginning the row, the chain 4 replaces the last DC in this cluster. It's really simple. I hope you understood that. I hope I do not confuse you with any of the things I said. In case something was confusing, please do leave your question in the comment section, or you can post it on the group that we have for the cal so we can address it. Post it here or there, wherever. So that's it. This is the basic technique for granny square. The plan as of now is for the back panel, we are going to keep going as wide as we want the back panel to be. So the back panel, as we already discussed, it does not have any shaping. So we're just going to keep making a square until we're happy with the size of the square. And you do not worry about the length of the top. We're just going to worry about the width of the top at this moment. So this was my measurement. You're going to have to use the calculations you made. I've explained that in the previous video. Do refer to that. Once we finish that, we will create, so once we finish the back panel, we will create a poll on the group to see what neckline the rest of the cal members want, and based on that we will proceed on the front panel. So that's it for this video. I will see you in the next one. Bye.